Welcome to rSlash Entitledparents, where OP describes what it's like to date someone in a cult. A little over a year ago, when my neighbor moved into the townhouse next to us, things seemed great. Their kids were nice, and overall seemed like they were part of a loving, normal home. They were quirky, but nice people who were always willing to help. From installing a screen door to enjoying a beer and a decent conversation about home improvement. One day, red flags started popping up. Halloween came up a few months after they moved in, and we could hear all kinds of banging and pounding coming from the side of the house they're attached to. We thought it was just the kids playing and having fun, until the father called me crying on the phone about how he was so angry they didn't get invited to a big party at the next house over. The owner of that house has a policy with all the neighbors. If my garage door is open, feel free to stop in and join us. You're always invited. A few weeks later, their kids got the idea that our dog should have sleepovers with them and started asking to walk him sometimes. Which at first we thought was cute, and it was. Until one day, when the kids were asking about having a doggy sleepover once in a while, their mother pulled me away from my wife and said that it was really unfair that we get to have our dog all week long and that they have to build their schedule to see him around our lives and when we're home. I really had no clue what to say, and then she doubled down, insisting that their family should have him on weekends because I work shift work and I get to see him all week long as much as I want. Our relationship with them ended after we caught one of their kids scratching our cars accidentally, and they told us to call the police when we tried letting them know what happened. We didn't want money or for it to be fixed, we just wanted their kids to be more careful. So I want to be clear about this because the way OP wrote this is a little bit vague, but the father was banging on the walls of his own house in anger because he wasn't invited to a party, and then called the other neighbor to cry about it? This doesn't sound like the behavior of an adult. This sounds like the behavior of an 8-year-old. Our next Reddit post is from Dark Starlet lol. So where I live there's a small army base, and around it is housing estate where the families live. Part of this estate was sold to a couple of housing associations, and I live in one of those. The army families move around a lot, so people in those houses generally move every 2 years or so. Some a little more frequently, others less so. There's a row of 4 houses directly across from me, and one of them was empty, ready for new tenants. Here's where we begin. I took my daughter to nursery and then went shopping for some new clothes. This was at 9 a.m. I get back about 11:30 a.m. and see a large moving truck in the street. To avoid them, I go to the other side of my property. I suffer from chronic anxiety and tend to avoid most people. I go in the front door and take the new clothes upstairs to sort. While I'm there, I hear noise from my back garden and door. Looking out the window, I see a man with a large toolbox trying to open my back door. A woman behind him looking furious, and the guys from the moving company standing around with boxes looking bored. I run down the stairs and open the door, meaning the guy, who I guess was a locksmith, practically fell through the door into my kitchen. He was surprised, of course, and after looking around, he was confused because clearly someone already lived here. The woman then sighs dramatically and thanks me for finally turning up because they've been there since 8 a.m. trying to get in. She just wants to get her stuff in so she and her kids can sleep. She waves the moving guys forward and then goes to get her kids out of the car. I'm busy trying to stop the moving guys from coming in with boxes, and her 2 kids, about 3 and 6, come charging into my garden. I've got a slide, swing, small trampoline, and windy house there for my daughter to play with. I yell at them all to get out of my garden and stay away from my house. One of the movers looks in the window to my living room, sees all of my furniture in there, and waves his team back to the truck. His team leader pulls out some paperwork and begins going over it. The woman starts yelling at me, telling me I was a liar and a thief, among other things. I've lived in this house for 4 years and tell her such, but she's having none of it. She gets right up in my face, screaming at me. And I'm having trouble not bursting into tears and running away, or ducking her. The locksmith tries to calm her down, and she starts having a go at him next. I call up the local police station office. There's one in the housing estate, but it generally only caters to the army people and such. I figured calling them to deal with her was the best solution. They arrive after a few minutes and take the woman aside. Her kids are still playing on my daughter's things, so I tell them to get off and go to their mother because these toys don't belong to them. They go reluctantly, and when their mother notices, she begins yelling again. Apparently, those toys aren't mine. They were put there by the army for her kids because her husband is such a wonderful soldier. That this is her house and I'm just some squatter trying to steal it from her. This is when the movers come over and tell her this is the wrong address. She's moving into number 4 and this is number 14. She goes very silent, grabs her kids, and leaves the garden. I call out and ask her if she's going to pay for the damage done to my garden, grass torn up by her kids and the movers, my door, from what looks like footprints trying to kick it in and the scratches from the locksmith, my bushes by the gate, movers, and her yanking at them while waiting for the locksmith. She tells me no because she's done nothing wrong, which is when I inform her that I have cameras installed that would have seen the whole thing. I asked the officers if they would like to view the footage, and one of them watches the whole incident take place once I bring out my laptop, which both cameras are linked to. And he says he doesn't have anything to collect the footage with just now, but he'll come back later to get it. He also tells me that he'll have to report the woman's behavior to the base, as a family's bad behavior can have repercussions for their soldiers too. It's now 5 p.m. The officer was here collecting copies of the footage in case it was needed, and might be shown to certain army officials as an example of her behavior. The husband turned up about an hour ago, and there was a huge argument across the street. Everyone could hear it, but not exactly what was being said. Either way, this family hasn't exactly had a good start to their time here. I can only hope they move away soon so I won't have to deal with this woman again. Update. So today, I managed to speak with the husband of the woman. He actually came over and knocked on my door. He apologized for his wife mixing up our houses and wanted to make sure I was okay. He looked over the damage to my door and said he would be happy to pay to fix the damage and buy some stuff to repair my lawn. I thanked him and asked what happened with the whole house thing. He said the movers arrived first, got the wrong house, and then called his wife, who immediately told them to call a locksmith. The movers had keys so they could get the large items in before she got there. The locksmith apparently is used by the movers a lot and didn't question the house numbers. When the wife arrived, she stopped the locksmith and tried to get the door open with the keys, and when that didn't work, she started kicking the door. The locksmith stopped her and started trying to open the door himself, which is where I came in. His wife told him everything after their argument, and he had been keeping an eye out so he could come talk to me. Things are basically sorted now. OP, if you still got those videos, I will pay you for those videos. Our next Reddit post is from I Know This Name Is Taken. I grew up in a cult that believed, among other things, that women were the property of men, and children were the property of parents. So, as an unmarried daughter, I was basically a cherished slave. I ran the house, meal planned, cooked, and even homeschooled my youngest siblings. All while trying to homeschool myself through high school. Having grown up my whole life this way, I didn't even know the law would have been on my side if I had decided to defy my parents and move out when I turned 18. My parents constantly reminded me that until they gave me away to my husband, I was still their child and would obey them, as the mouthpieces of God in my life. One day, my parents told me they'd received a phone call from the parents of another family we knew. Their oldest son had noticed me and wanted permission to court me. So, per protocol, the parents would talk to each other, then each talk to their kids to arrange the whole thing. My mom was beaming with pride, but I thought about it for a little bit and said I didn't want to do it. Mom's smile disappeared and she cried, "What? Why?" I gave her my reasons, very good ones, I thought, but my mom wasn't satisfied and told me I was not allowing God to work in my life, and that I should just obey them and trust that God's will would be done. Being the good girl I was, I relented and said yes. Then followed a week or two of awkward family gatherings between our two houses, because this version of courtship never allowed for the couple to be alone together. I tried to ease the tension by telling funny stories and encouraging other family members to talk, but only received stern rebukes from his mother, who very clearly did not approve of me. Once she said, "We don't believe in practical jokes, so we are not impressed by that story." I mumbled that I wasn't trying to impress them, but they could talk about anything they wanted, but no one did. Another time, I was alone with his mom in the living room and she stated, "I only had 2 requirements on the girl he chose. 1, that she came from a good family, and 2, that she knew her Bible. And you have both of those, so I'm not going to say anything." I was confused at feeling so rejected when I didn't even want this in the first place. I mean, really, who was courting who? Then I got a job offer as a church receptionist, and my parents told me his parents called them again and said they didn't approve of women working outside the home and didn't want me to take the job. We believed the same way, except it was after the woman was a mother. Before she had kids, it was up to her father or husband whether or not she could work someplace else. This being a strange situation where my father allowed it, but the guy I was courting didn't. My parents told me to call him and get his permission too. I thought that phone call went well. He basically said he wasn't my husband yet and I should follow my own family's rules. He didn't mind and was okay with it, so I happily accepted the job. The next day, my parents told me his parents had called and canceled the whole relationship. It felt weird to get dumped without ever hearing from the guy dumping me, but it solved my problem. And I moved on, a little confused and definitely not in the mood for anyone else to court me. 2 years later, at 19, I still wasn't married. Shocker. And his family thought that meant God was saving me for him. The whole scenario repeated itself. But this time, my dad insisted that the guy court him first so he could decide if he was good enough for me before my heart got broken again. My dad told them until he made a decision one way or the other, he did not want any of them to contact me or tell me what was going on. The guy decided no contact couldn't possibly mean letters. So he wrote me a 5-page apology for dumping me 2 years before and confessing that he had been falling in love with me and wanting to know if it was worth his time to even get to know my dad. My parents saw his name on the envelope and confiscated the letter before finally deciding it was too late, and they explained the whole thing. I was honestly insulted that a guy I had barely seen in 2 years would say he loved me, but doubt if it was worth his time to follow my family's requirements to court me. Especially after the last time he tried it, his family made me feel like trash. We agreed to meet at a local restaurant and agree to the terms of relationship and decide if we even wanted to try it again. I sat on one side of the table with my parents on either side of me. He sat on the other side with his parents on either side of him. It felt like we had lawyers. His dad immediately started yelling at my dad for denying his son and saying it was so obvious that I wanted this, and he was holding me back. My dad is a quiet man, and he sat there like an angry stone while this man yelled at his face in the middle of the restaurant. It got so heated and embarrassing. The guy who liked me excused himself to the bathroom to throw up. While he was gone, his dad also said if we didn't accept his son, there might never be another guy to come along and marry me. This made me laugh because I wasn't that desperate to just accept the first guy to ask just because I was scared no one else would. I didn't care if I ever got married or not, even though I didn't dare tell anyone else that. The evening ended with an agreement that we would pick up where we left off. We thought that meant more courtship. They thought they already did courtship, so now it was an agreement to get engaged. The mistake quickly revealed itself a few days later when another guy friend I had, a new guy, emailed my dad himself and asked permission to court me. My dad told me I should tell the guy I was courting to ask him if I could stay friends with a guy who liked me but who I had rejected. The guy came up with what I thought was a pretty good plan. My dad would tell him I was already courting someone else, and then I could introduce him to some of my other friends, and then maybe he could leave on his own. I thought that was brilliant, and my dad spent the rest of the evening writing a tactful reply to the new guy. The guy I was courting was now aware that I had friends who were not female. Their family believed guys and girls could never be just friends, so I was essentially cheating on him with 20 other guys. He called me the next morning, 6 days after I had agreed to this courtship, and asked my permission to ask my dad's permission to ask me to marry him. Basically, the lamest over-the-phone proposal ever. He said he was in love with me and we didn't have to get married right away, but that I would just be his and have a ring on my finger so no one could take me away from him. I told him I was flattered that he thought he loved me and I wished I could say I loved him back, but I didn't. It had only been 6 days and I hadn't even decided how I felt about him yet. His voice changed instantly and he angrily snapped, asking if I was still talking to the guy who also liked me. I was shocked. I had never seen this side of him before. That's why it should take longer than 6 days to find a spouse, kids. I tried telling him that my dad had only just replied to his email and I hadn't had a chance to introduce him to my friends yet. He said, "That wasn't the plan. We agreed you wouldn't talk to him anymore." I shut him down and said, "Whoa, I'm only doing what you told me to do. We're not engaged yet. I talk to lots of guys and it doesn't mean anything romantic. We're just friends." His voice quieted down, but still sounded bitter and he said, "Well, if you can't agree to not talk to any other boys and only talk to me, maybe we shouldn't call this courting right now." "Maybe we shouldn't," I replied. We agreed that I would take a week to think about it and call him when I made my decision. Marry him and forsake all the male friends I'd known since I was 5, or cut off the relationship for a second time. I told my parents what happened, and they tried to convince me to just do what he wanted. But I finally yelled at them for the first time in my life that I was not going to marry anyone I didn't love. My dad was angry, but my mom sent me to my room and said we could talk about it later. I had a week after all. I was very sad. The only reason I was considering it was because my parents insisted it was God's will, and I really wanted to do what God said. But at the same time, this family seemed even more strict than my own, and I would miss all my old friends. There was so much to think about. About an hour later, I got 2 calls from this guy's mother, which I let go to voicemail. I didn't want to talk to her right then. Next thing I know, my little brother came up holding the house phone, saying it was the guy's mom and she demanded to talk to me. She scolded me for a long time, saying I'd cheated on her son and that he'd called off work this morning because he was worried sick over calling me and asking me to marry him. She all but called me a harlot because of all the guys I was talking to, while I tried to tell her I was not in a relationship with any of them. The guy's mom said, "You cheated on him. You are in a relationship with every person you meet." But not every relationship is a romantic one. "Between guys and girls, yes. For example, my husband is my best friend and I would never talk to other men, and neither would your mom." Oh, yes she would. She talks to other men all the time and she's friends with lots of people. "Well, I'm shocked. I honestly thought better of her than that." She then demanded to know why I needed 7 days to pray about whether or not to marry her son. "God doesn't take that long to answer a prayer. It sounds like you already know how you feel and you're just too scared to say it. It should take a day or 2 at the most." Look, your son agreed to let me have a week. If he can't do that, then the answer is no. "Well, let's not be too hasty." I thought, who's being hasty? I wanted a week. She then told me she would talk to her son and her husband and see what they wanted to do. I hung up the phone and threw it across the room. I'd never been accused of anything like that before, and I curled up in a ball and cried. My mom heard me and came to see what was wrong. When I told her everything that horrible woman said to me, and I stated firmly that I never wanted to see anyone from that family again. She called my dad up, and he was angry for me being accused of being a harlot with all these boys, but told me I was not allowed to make my decision until a week was up, because that was what I'd agreed to. I just silently told myself they could all think what they wanted, but I knew my answer was no, and it would still be no a week from now. He called the family back and told them none of them were to contact me in any way, shape, or form for the whole week. And when I'd made my decision, he would call them and let them know what it was. They were angry, but they never contacted me again. Almost 2 years later, I married the new guy who had emailed my dad. Remember him? He was not a member of our cult and taught me how to think for myself. Our courtship looked a lot more like dating than anything else and made a lot of people upset, but we didn't care. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary and we have 3 sons. I feel like I was rescued. Then down in the comments someone said, awesome story. Do you have anything else revolving around entitlement in that cult? And OP responds, oh yes. They believed God spoke through the parents, so even disagreeing with them was like disagreeing with God. It spilled into every area of my life. This cult sounds like a wet dream for entitled parents. And I'm really glad you got out OP. That place sounds insane. That was rSlash Entitledparents. And if you like this video, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day. Also, don't forget to like this video because it really helps my channel grow.